Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Sasquatch Watch Radio with your host, Billy Willard, and the Blog Squatcher. Strap in, hold on tight, get ready, because it is about to go down.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of Sasquatch Watch Radio. Today is Monday, March 16th, 2009, and we have a great and wonderful show for you tonight. We have on the show tonight Henry Franzoni, which we will get to in a moment. But before we get to that, I would like to invite the prodigious Blog Squatcher to the show. How are you doing, Blog Squatcher?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you doing, Billy?
I'm doing. You think I'm running out of adjectives, don't you?
Well, I guess not.
I can keep coming up with them, I'm telling you. So, you got
Awesome.
any news for us tonight, Mr. Donlin?
Yeah, I do have a couple of items here. Let's see. The first item, almost everybody who listens to the show would also be someone who would watch Monster Quest. And I picked up an article a couple of days ago about a podiatrist who's going to be on the Monster Quest season this year. And, you know, what he says is they've had all kinds of people look at the footprints, but they've never actually had a podiatrist look at it. So, you know, he thought that was significant. And his name, I'm probably going to mispronounce his last name, but it's Dr. Michael Nierenberg.
Okay.
And he'll show up on an episode that probably will be focusing on footprint casts. And here's something that he says that I thought was interesting. This is quoting from an article in the posttrib.com. At the end of this, he says, there was nothing there that I saw that screamed hoax. I think for someone to hoax these footprints would be very difficult. He said he based his opinion on the detail in the footprints, particularly the positioning of the toes and the area under the toes and the arch of the foot. And this is him talking again. The proportions of the footprints were different than that of a human being, generally, Nierenberg said. So generally, they did not look like human footprints. So there we go. He's going to come on to the show, and as a podiatrist, he's going to say that he doesn't think they're hoaxed, and you know, who knows what else he'll say. But that seems to be kind of positive.
Yep. Very good.
All right. Got one other thing. You know how I kind of go off on skeptics a little bit. You know, every now and again I go off just a little.
Okay.
And one of the things that skeptics like to say is that when people are giving their, you know, their Bigfoot reports, they're just saying what they wanted to see. You know, they went out into the woods and they saw something, they didn't really know what it was, and their mind made them overlay the thing they wanted it to be on it. And I've always thought that was, you know, basically BS, because who goes out in the woods expecting to see a Bigfoot? You know, especially most of the people who we get reports from, they're people who've not had a thought about Bigfoot before. Well, so this is a BFRO report. It's actually number 25031, and the witness says this, and I thought this was worth bringing up. I wrote this story about a month ago and was embarrassed to submit it. The more I thought about what I saw, the more I can remember looking at it and expecting to see a bear. It was puzzling to expect to see a bear, and then you see something you can't explain. I've asked myself 1,000 times, could this have been a bear? Maybe it hurt its front legs and was forced to try to escape on its hind legs. But it moved too fast and navigated around trees too easy for it to be a wounded bear. Then when it looked at me, I expected to see a long face of a bear, but it wasn't. So this is a guy who's actually reporting having the exact opposite thing happen. He sees something in the woods, he doesn't know what it is, and he's trying to make it be a bear with his brain, but it's not a bear. So he can't turn it into a bear with his brain.
Right.
So I'd like to bring that up because that is one of the favored skeptical response is, oh, people are just, they're seeing what they want to see.
Right. Right. Yeah, you don't hear that too often. Everybody, most of the stories that you hear, they're convinced that they've seen Bigfoot, and it's nice to hear a story with a little bit of a different twist to it. So that's good. Well, we will not hold off any longer. We would like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Henry Franzoni to the show. Henry, welcome, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm happy to be here with you guys.
Now, tell us. Yes, we're obliged to have you. Now, I'm going to be truthful with you. I've only been in this since 2005. So when I first heard about you, I was not aware of your existence. Hey, that's kind of like Bigfoot.
I am not surprised in the least.
You're as elusive as Bigfoot.
I certainly was for a long time.
But anyway, for those who, there's been a recent influx, I'm sure as you know, into the Bigfoot world, and there's a lot of new folks, and, there's some folks
My
here.
God, it's like, yes, tell me about it. I have a very unusual perspective on it, but yeah, it's a whole new generation, or maybe two new generations.
Right, it really is.
Been involved.
So, for all those folks, go ahead and tell these folks who you are, how you got started, because I know that's a nice big story.
I would be happy to. Like the people you were talking about in your intro, I was a person that really didn't go looking for Bigfoot the first time I ran into them. But I was looking for something. I had been reading old Indian stories here in Oregon where I live about a place named Skookum Lake, and the story I read said that the Indians believed the evil god of the woods lived there. So I said to my wife, hey, let's go camping there and see if the evil god of the woods still lives there. And it was a big joke. I mean, it was an excuse to go out camping in a mountain place, and, it was just kind of, neat to go and ha, ha, ha. And we ran into Bigfoot immediately the very first time we went there. So then I became really fascinated, and that was in 1993. And I went from, like so many people, I went from, that's just some fantasy or legend to, oh, my God, they're real in, 5 seconds. And I just was fascinated, and I said to myself right away, well, I bet that's the evil god of the woods that the Indians were talking about. Mm-hmm. So, this being 1993, I was just very much like so many people are today. I was very interested in trying to make scientists and policymakers take the subject seriously. I ran into Peter Byrne the very next day, and he was heading a project called the Bigfoot Research Project that had been funded out of the Academy of Applied Science in Boston, which is Robert Ryan's outfit, he of the Loch Ness Monster. Mm-hmm. And Peter Byrne had $5 million to look for Bigfoot here in Oregon, and he had set up a base camp in Mount Hood, Oregon. So, within a few months, he invited me to join the board of advisors. I had a lot of computer expertise I could bring to the table. And within a short time, I was involved with Jeff Glickman and Renee DeHinden and Patty Patterson, Roger Patterson's wife, negotiating a deal where we could digitize Patty Patterson's copy of the Patterson film that she had. We paid her $20,000, and then we made a digital copy of it. And we got permission to use 30 stills from that film in Jeff Glickman's science paper that he was writing towards a resolution of the Bigfoot phenomenon, which I contributed to. which was published in 1996 originally. We paid Rene DeHinden $10,000 for permission to use those photos from the Patterson film. He had the rights to the stills, and Patty had the rights to the motion version.
Mm-hmm.
And we produced, I think, a very scholarly report on Bigfoot. Jeff Glickman put it out. He wrote it. We all helped. I was involved in the whole production of all of this stuff. We did a lot of things that people think about. We built a huge surveillance system in Bull Run in Oregon, which is a watershed. Actually, it's part of the city of Portland's water supply. We built a huge infrared camera system with seismic troop movement sensors that turned it on and off. And we put this thing out in the middle of Mount Hood's forest and ran a microwave relay link to Peter Burns Base Station in Hood River at the 2.5 gigahertz band for the technically inclined.
Right.
And we ran this for 2 years looking for Bigfoot, and we never saw a Bigfoot with our huge detection apparatus.
Right.
It was very fancy. It cost us $500,000. And we cut a deal with the U.S. Forest Service that we would run it like an experiment, and we would record every single triggering of it by a deer or a bear or an elk or any kind of animal so that they could use it to estimate the population of different animals in Bull Run. So we did a lot of stuff. We did a lot of work. We had it's pretty much all covered in Glickman's paper, which was published back then. And in 1998, at the University of British Columbia, I gave a presentation on my Indian research. I had ventured off into that direction since 1993. Right away, I started there, and I pretty much kept going that way. And John Green was at that symposium, and so was DeHinden, and so was Grover Krantz, and we all presented, and a lot of that symposium wound up in the film Sasquatch Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes, I have.
Well, I'm in that. I'm in that movie, mysteriously enough. A lot of people have no idea why I'm in that movie or who I am. Who's Henry Franzoni, anyhow? It was my last public experience with Bigfoot. I swore off talking about Bigfoot in public, doing any kind of presentations or doing any kind of appearances. I swore off it that day, July of 1998. And I didn't think I'd ever get involved again. But after all this time, I of course always kept a private interest in Bigfoot.
Right.
And living in Oregon, I spent a lot of time out in the wilderness. I live in the woods in the first place, and in the second place, I spent a lot of time working in the woods as a government biologist. So I worked out in the boondocks here, and I kept my interest up, and in fact, I kept focusing on learning more about the Indian point of view about Bigfoot, and actually all the different Indians' point of view, because Indians don't agree about Bigfoot at all. Right. And I basically retreated from the whole thing. There's a number of reasons. I got to a point where I said, no one ever believes you if you explain it to them. People have to experience it themselves. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, there's just no convincing. After working on the, I guess at the same time, what I also did in 1993 was, being a computer freak, I thought the World Wide Web was the greatest thing in the world, and so I created a database and a discussion forum for Bigfoot and a website, and I got permission from DeHinden to use a few stills from the Patterson film, and I got all this stuff put together, and I ended up making websites for DeHinden and for Peter Byrne and for Matt Moneymaker and for Ron Moorhead and who else? Well, that's all I can think of right now. Matt Moneymaker would likely tell you, although I don't know, that by looking at me and the mistakes I made, he made an improved model and made the BFRO. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I served as a foil for Matt to develop his ideas because he thought that I made mistakes and he was going to improve on it. And thus you have the BFRO. I would, of course, disagree because I really wasn't interested in what Matt was interested in. I don't think I still am, but I'm happy that Matt has found his dream and is living his Bigfoot dream. I'm glad. I think I helped him somewhere along the way.
Right.
And I helped a lot of people back then. One of my basic ways I operated was I said everyone else can take the credit. You can accomplish anything you want as long as everybody else takes the credit. I contributed to Dr. Robert Pyle's book, Where Bigfoot Walks. I contributed to Tom Powell's books, The Locals. I contributed to some Chris Murphy books, some Lauren Coleman columns. There was a time, actually, at that time where I felt really ripped off all the time because whenever I posted anything on a Bigfoot discussion group, it would appear in someone's book or column or whatever. So I felt rather restricted because I was like, geez, if what I'm saying is, like everyone's putting it in their books, this is really getting old. So I was one of these invisible people that really saw my role as helping all these others in their endeavors with Bigfoot, and that's what I did. I helped everybody, and I certainly brought Bigfoot to the internet. I think there's no doubt about it. I was the idiot who said, wow, Bigfoot website, Bigfoot club on the internet, Bigfoot discussion forum, yeah. So I feel very strange seeing the world that you have today with the thousands or, hundreds of Bigfoot forums and the politics of that day, my day, have been multiplied tenfold. And you've just got this incredible situation. There's Bigfoot shows. There's, it's kind of amazing how much interest this has generated in the last 10 years.
Yeah,
I was never left alone by it. Part of what has brought me back was that people nagged me. People that knew said, well, what about Bigfoot? Or whenever there was a Bigfoot sighting anywhere in the Northwest, I'd get 10 emails or I'd get, 5 phone calls. Hey, did you hear that? And people just associated me with Bigfoot. And there was really nothing I could do about it. I did a Google search on my name. I have abandoned all my websites and things in 1998. I killed all reference to myself and Bigfoot in 1998. Yet, when I did a Google search in 2008, I had over 90,000 hits for my name, which really blew me away. And the first 40% of them were all about Bigfoot. So I said, oh, man, I've got to deal with the fact that the world associates me with Bigfoot. I've got nothing to do with it. It's like something that, even though I stepped away in 1998, there was no evidence of that. So I said, okay, I'll write a book about it. I'll come back, but I'm going to tell you what I really think, because that was part of the problem before, for me, was that I developed a public persona that was very non-controversial, and I said all the right things, and I knew how to massage all the egos of all the different people with all their different points of view, and I'm still not interested in confronting them, really, but I figured I'll set the record straight, I'll tell people what I really think, because I didn't ever tell people what I really thought back then.
Right.
And it took me a long time to sort of knit everything together and to wait and see, wait for some developments to occur. And then finally I said, okay, I guess I can talk now a little more. There will be a handful of people that are going to be open to what I have to say now. Whereas I think back then there was nobody.
Right.
So I said, I'll write a book for just a handful of people that'll like it. I'm not going to write a book that's going to be a bestseller, that's for sure. But I'm going to write one that, rather than serving up the image that everyone wants to see, I'll give people what I know they want from me, because what was clear to me from 1998 is people wanted me to present all my Indian place name research. Mm-hmm. People bugged me about that in the last 10 years a lot. They said, wow, many people approached me and said, could you give me all your Indian place name research so I can put it in my book? And I kind of said to myself, I'm really tired of that, so no, I'm going to wait, until I can present all the Indian place name research that people want from me and mix it with all the stuff I actually want to tell them about Bigfoot. Because, of course, having spent 15 years, I'm a newbie too, but I had a very intense period from 1993 to 8 where I had a lot of money and I could pretty much do all kinds of research into Bigfoot, and did. And the Glickman paper is really the result of that. And we tried. We gave the best try we could to get policymakers and scientists to take the subject seriously. And it was interesting to see the reaction, which is absolutely nobody knows we even wrote the paper. So it was a real lesson in human beings more than it was Bigfoot. But I saw that institutional science is certainly not going to take Bigfoot seriously anytime soon, in my opinion. And we did a lot of we laid the groundwork for a lot of other people, and that's also what Glickman thought he was doing, which was Glickman wanted to provide a world and provide an environment where scientists could be funded and research could be funded and scientists would be supported, where an interest would be fostered in the subject along with funding for it. So we really approached it in that way. I was involved with Jeff Meldrum some in the last period of the Glickman project, which was called the North American Science Institute. Dr. Meldrum was on the board also. And we saw ourselves as, in fact, helping him with his get started and helping him along in his research. But, I have relationships with a lot of these characters that date from those days, so I have a lot of history with these guys.
Right.
They know that I'm off in left field. Back then, I think they tolerated me because I was off in left field, but I was a vote on the board for who got the funding. So, they were kind to me. I hope that there's still some mutual respect there going on. One of the funny things about me is that even though I'm avowed kooky, I don't really agree with hardly anybody about what Bigfoot is or what's going on. I have done a lot of straight science. I would say that I've done as much straight science, including publishing the results about Bigfoot, as anybody ever. However, as many scientists said back in the day, it's too bad you went to the dark side, because a lot of them saw my views as going to the dark side and as betraying the scientific principles that they believed in. I did not believe that. In fact, during the 10 years that I was not publicly involved with Bigfoot at all, and I just had my own little private interest, I did a lot of actual biological monitoring for the government and for the tribes here in the Northwest. And I became pretty skilled at monitoring fish and wildlife over that decade. And I published a lot of real science papers, which I co-authored, which were peer-reviewed and everything. So what disturbs the scientists a lot about me is I know how to play the science game. I'm a published scientific author. But I personally, when it comes to Bigfoot, venture into a whole different kind of science that, let's just say it's a bit controversial, and I know that, you know. But this is also one of my points is you can't really explain it to anybody. They never believe you. Hopefully, and this is what my book is all about, I'm trying to help you, the individual person, go out and have your own experience so you'll find out for yourself. And I think that's really the best that one can do. You can't convince institutional science. You really can't convince the masses. Now, many people may disagree with me and wish to do that, but that's the hard lesson I learned is, no, it's not worth it. It's a fool's errand, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But the individual person can go out and have experiences that will convince them of what's going on, or of the quote-unquote reality of Bigfoot. And that's the best you can hope for. And so really that's what my book is in many ways, is it's attempted indirect instruction manual for trying to help people have their own experiences. Because, and like I was said in the beginning, that's really what the Bigfoot phenomenon is experiences, mostly. There's no scientific data, actually, still, no hard data, but there's lots of sighting reports. There's lots of Indian place names, and there's a couple of hair samples, and maybe a skin sample or two. But still, there's no definitive evidence that's persuading institutional science to jump on board. Right. And, of course, that's a good thing for all the amateurs like me and you and everyone else, because there's a lot of room for amateurs in this Bigfoot world. Right. You know, amateurs can make a valuable contribution. They do make valuable contributions all the time. Right. In the sense of sighting reports. And it's really an interesting field because of that. But yeah, I just basically think if I can help people have their own experiences, great, but I'm never going to talk them into it. There's just going to be the handful of people that go, I want to climb up into the mountains at night and sit on top of the mountain all night long looking around. And that's never going to be that many people. There's only so many people that are that driven. It's a small number.
Yeah. Well, I can say that me and DB are probably within that number, wouldn't you say, DB?
I suspected that with you. Yeah.
We have spent some cold nights on the mountain.
See, I had a feeling you gentlemen were soulmates on that level. Yes, spending some cold nights on the mountain. That's right. That's really to me the only answer, because if you go to a forum and you try to convince people with logic, it's like, oh my God, you know, it ad hoc ad nauseum. It just goes on forever. People just have an endless plausibility discussion. And what's amazing to me is that the one forum, I guess I learned that people really like to argue, because back between 93 and 98 when I had my forum, and it was the only Bigfoot forum, and I was the moderator of the only Bigfoot discussion group, I look today at all these different groups and I see all the same patterns and basically all the same discussions over and over again. And I'm like, wow. Well, I guess if you don't have any experiences, you'd still be having these same discussions over and over again. It's just kind of an observation, because it's very strange for me to look on this new Bigfoot world today and go, wow, what happened?
Right.
You know,
it
hasn't moved.
There's so many. Plus, there's so many out there. I'm sure you've been looking
around. Oh
around.
my God! It's
back,
it's amazing, and in that I feel a tiny pang of responsibility, because I helped. Probably what I really helped with the internet was I helped make a lot of Bigfoot researchers.
Right.
I showed a lot of people that, hey, all you have to do is just declare yourself a Bigfoot researcher, get a website, get a forum, do your thing, publish a newsletter, whatever, get a database, and poof, you're a Bigfoot researcher, hey, and that idea really caught on. I didn't realize how much that would really catch on.
Yeah,
people have a real interest in it, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but if I had a penny for every person that said, wow, what a great idea, I'll get a Bigfoot club together. Man, it was just I'm glad I helped in that way. But that's why people don't know who I am, because by 1998 I was completely sick of it, and I was like, oh my God, I just don't want to talk about this with anybody ever again.
Well, one thing that listeners would probably want to hear about that you did during that time and since was you collated all the sighting reports, and you were able to kind of get an answer for the question of where you might most likely to find a Bigfoot. Can you want to talk about that?
Yeah, there's why don't I just grab this here, page 22, yes. One of the things we did back then, frankly, pretty much all the work we did has been ignored ever since. Thank you very much, Bigfoot World. And I'm talking about the straight science work. So one of the things we did was we took what we had at the time, which was the back cover of John Green's book, The Apes Among Us, where he listed the number of sighting reports he got in each state and province in a picture on the back cover. And we thought, wow, John Green at that time he really didn't like Peter Byrne, and he would not let us have access to his data unless we renounced Peter Byrne. That was the politics of that day and age.
Mm-hmm.
And we would not come out publicly and renounce Peter Byrne, so John Green wouldn't let us have it. So we just took it off his back cover. Took the population of every state and province, and basically we made a simple model where we divided the number of sighting reports for each state and province by the population there. The idea was simply this. The probability of having a sighting report basically is based on the density of animals, the population of big feet, population density of big feet, and the population density of human observers. Much more likely to have a Bigfoot observation where there's a whole lot of human observers to have one. That was our idea. So we basically divided the number of sighting reports by the human population density for each province and each state. And this gave us a simple population model that said where the most big feet were. Now, today you guys have the BFRO's webpage, which has a summary of like over 4,000 sighting reports. And John Green's data is summarized on a Bobby Short's webpage, circa 2001. And so when you look at the ranking of the states and provinces, after you've normalized the sighting reports, and what that really does is it's sort of telling you where the population of big feet is the largest when you factor out the number of humans around. Alaska's number, with John Green, Alaska's number 1, British Columbia's 2, then Montana's 3, Manitoba's 4, Washington's 5, the Yukon is 6. Wait, Montana, Manitoba, Oregon's 5, Yukon is 6, Washington's 7, Alberta is 8, Idaho's 9, then South Dakota. 11 is California, 12 is Wyoming. So when you factor it out, you see that a whole lot of them are in the north. I mean, they're almost all northern states and provinces. And so one of the patterns you see when you do this to the sighting reports is a continental pattern that there's more big feet above the 45th parallel than below. In fact, the more north you go above the 45th parallel, it seems the more of them there are. And if you look at the BFRO's data from 2008 from their website, the way theirs is ranked is the Yukon is 1, Alaska's 2, British Columbia's 3, Oregon is 4, it moves up. Manitoba's 5, Washington's 6, it moves up 2. Then Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Colorado, Alberta, New Mexico, Texas, Utah, Ontario. So those are the top 15. Now, same pattern as in John Green's data as in the BFRO's data. A lot of those are the same. The order's a little different, but the same top 15 are basically there, mixed up. The second interesting pattern is that, let me count, 3, 6, 9. 9 of the top 12 of the BFRO's data, 9 of those top states and provinces have the continental divide passing through them. And with John Green's data, it's 7 out of the top 12 have the continental divide passing through them. And so this is my second interpretation of the normalized data, which is not only are there more big feet as you go north, but there's more as you approach the continental divide. That the continental divide seems to be where the most big feet are, and north of the 45th parallel seems to be where the most big feet are. Now, that may be controversial, but I think the data supports that view when one just makes this simple population model to just get a really simplistic view of where the big feet are. And then when you think about it, you realize that the Yeti lives in Tibet and Nepal, which is where the continental divide is in Asia, the Himalayas. And as you go north of the Himalayas, you get to the Tian Shan Mountains in China, which is where the Yeren and the Tian Shan is said to live, also the continental divide. And as you continue north, you get to the Pamir on the edge of Afghanistan and the Hindu Kush territory, which is where the Almas and the Almasty are said to live. And that's also the continental divide. And the continental divide continues up the Ural Mountains across Russia, which is where the Almas and the Almasty are also said to live. When you look at the continent of Australia, the Blue Mountains on the east coast is where most of the Yowie sighting reports are. And so I say that this pattern is true the world over. I think it's a global distribution pattern of big feet. The continental divides in every continent, and north on every continent, and south too. I basically am of the opinion that towards the poles is where they live, and towards the continental divides. Now, when one looks at more detailed data, like the Indian place names, rather than just the sighting reports, because, see, with the sighting reports, you don't have specific GPS coordinates for everything. But with Indian place names, you do. And so you're able to really look at the terrain distribution really closely. And when you look at that, you see that it's not just the Continental Divide, but it's basically every mountain range in North America. The summit peaks and ridges of every mountain range are where the Indians basically say these guys live. And here on the West Coast, and also on the East Coast, coastline, there's a lot of places named by the Indians along the coastlines as well. So that's really the overall, that's the big picture from 30,000 feet, is you see a distribution, normalized distribution, after you factor out human eyeballs, of the summit peaks and ridges everywhere and the coastlines everywhere. Now, of course, one can get more and more detailed. What I do with my book is that I compare Indian place names with Matt Moneymaker and the BFRO's 4,000 sighting reports and John Green's 3,500 sighting reports. I've got 4,085 Indian place names. And what I do is I treat Indian place names just like sighting reports. I say a place was named Bigfoot, maybe because somebody saw a Bigfoot, or maybe because somebody saw a bear, like you guys were talking about, and thought it was a Bigfoot, or saw a Bigfoot and thought it was a bear. Then they probably would have named it Bear. But I basically said Indian place names are the same thing. They're anecdotal. They're not really data. You really don't know if a guy named Bigfoot Mountain because he saw a Bigfoot or not, but maybe he did. And it's like the same kind of subjective decision you make when you say, maybe that guy's telling the truth and he really saw a Bigfoot. Pardon me. So when I look at Indian place names, I see the exact same pattern that I see with John Green's data and the BFRO's data. The place names, Alaska's number 1, Northwest Territories are number 2, the Yukon's number 3, Montana's 4, Wyoming's 5, Idaho's 6, New Mexico's 7, Oregon's 8, Nevada's 9, Utah's 10, Newfoundland's 11, Colorado's 12, North Dakota's 13, British Columbia's 15. So it's a little different, but pretty much it's the usual suspects in a different order.
Right.
And the same secondary pattern applies too, where 8 of the top 12 have the Continental Divide passing through them. So once again, one sees the same pattern of almost all these are above the 45th parallel, and 8 out of 12, which is 66%, have the Continental Divide. So I think that my speculation or my hypothesis that Indian place names are pretty much the same thing as sighting reports, the data backs it up, I think. Or my interpretation of the data backs it up, let's say that, So really I'm shocked that since we published this in 1998, now Glickman published the same idea in his 1996 paper towards a resolution of the Bigfoot phenomenon. But no one ever picked up on it. Glickman did not have complete data. He only could do North America with John Green's data because he had no population figures for Canada. Years later, I could use the same method, but I had lots of data. I had 3 sets of at least 4,000 sighting reports, and I had population data for, 3-year intervals for everything. So I've been able to do a lot more thorough job than Jeff did back in the day, because this was originally his idea. He did not see the pattern I saw because he didn't spread it between America and Canada. So he never saw the 45th parallel and the continental divide. He never saw that because I don't think you can see that unless you do Canada and the United States together. And only then do you see that, like Bigfoot probably does, you have to look at the whole continent, not really looking at the states and the nations involved.
Right.
So you can't be Canadian or North American biased here or USA biased. You know, you're not going to see this pattern if you don't combine Canada and the USA.
Right. That's interesting, Henry. It really is that you've really looked at this, from that standpoint. I've never really heard it described that way, and it's interesting. I know DB's further along in your book than I am, so he probably already knew all that.
It's I'm glad you guys find it interesting. It's what's old is new again. I'm glad. In a way, I'm glad nobody else picked up on this in the last 10 years because 10 years has gone by, and I said, gee, nobody ever really finished what Glickman started.
Right.
I said, I guess I should do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Hey, DB, has there been any questions? I have the chat room. Just so you know, Henry, there's 67 people in this chat room, and it's so hard to keep up with it because it scrolls by so fast. Has there been any questions in there, DB?
I have seen one question from a fellow named Cryptic Squatch, and I don't know. It wasn't pertaining to anything we were talking about. He just wants to know what's the best course of action for a researcher if he comes into possession of a Bigfoot body. Got any advice for him?
I would say the best course of action for him is to stop taking drugs.
So are you saying that that's not going to happen?
You don't think he'll ever have a body?
I basically am, yes, I am strongly of the opinion that from my corner of the world, the whole idea that a body's going to show up any day now is a fantasy. And it's a necessary fantasy for a lot of people. And I do like to respect the level that people are on. I don't wish to confront them about it, but sometimes I have to just sort of say, look, there's a whole other approach. And in a nutshell, here's the whole other approach. If you assume that this is just a simple animal, a whole bunch of stuff comes with that, like the idea that a body's going to show up really any day. But if you don't have to assume that they're paranormal. If you just assume that they're people, which is what Indians say they are, and in my neck of the woods and my world, I pretty much agree with the Indian point of view about these guys. So I think of them as people. Once you assume that they're people rather than apes, you find that you go, well, they probably bury their own then. And in fact, just like all people everywhere, they have their own rituals for the dead, and they probably have their own way of taking them into the ground and burying them in places where we will never find them. And so I do not think that we are ever going to get a body, because I assume that these guys are intelligent, as intelligent as people, at least, and that they have their own rituals for the dead, and they take care of their own. So the fact is that there's no data whatsoever that supports the idea that a body's going to show up, nor is there any data that supports my idea. Until there is data, one way or the other, we can all have these wild hypotheses about whether or not a body's going to show up, because there's absolutely no data. Now, the fact that no data has showed up in 50 years of looking, that suggests that I'm right. So this is one of those things that, of course, set me at odds with so many Bigfoot researchers when I would say, look, looking for a body is a fool's errand. And people don't really like to hear that. But it's I forgive them for this. Like I said, you can have any kind, you can afford the luxury of the ape point of view until there's data that proves you wrong. And I'm willing to say that I believe that in the future I will be proved right and they will be proved wrong. Now, they probably don't feel that way, and they think a body's going to show up any day. But I don't. And so far, I'm right.
Well, you would also be right if it turned out that Bigfoot, I mean, you would appear to be right if it turned out that Bigfoot didn't exist and this was all somehow some kind of a mass delusion like some of the skeptics claim.
Yeah, but you
so
know, yes, you're right. But, you know, that's the thing is, I don't know about you guys, but like in my case, I've had a lot of personal contact with them, you know, where I've run into them and seen them and smelled them and interacted. And so I know they're real. Mm-hmm. And I also know that that's how all the people that say, hey, they're real, know that they're real, is they had their own personal experience with them.
Right.
Something I learned a long time ago is that your personal experience never rises to the level of scientific proof. And I think a whole bunch of people, like a load of people, are confused about that. They try to get people's personal experiences to somehow be scientific proof, or their own personal experiences to somehow be scientific proof. But a scientist is going to say, hey, that's anecdotal evidence. That's not evidence at all. That's not even data. That's just a story. And it's always a subjective determination as to whether or not the story's true. So, yeah, you're right. You know, people can make that argument, but then there's always the people like me that say, no, I've seen them. Hey, you know, they're real. And that's really my whole interest in it is I knew they were real. I wanted to understand more about them. I didn't even want to waste time convincing others that they were real. I was like, no, I just wanted to know for myself what's going on. I didn't really feel the need to drag institutional science along with me. I tried.
Yeah, you made a point that made me think of a question that I've thought of before, and I really don't know the answer to it, and maybe you do. It's the stories themselves are not evidence. I get that, but when you have a body of stories and the body of stories hang together and give you data, isn't that some kind of evidence that's arising from the stories? Like you just used all the sighting reports to show that if you wanted to find a Sasquatch, your best bet is to go north of the 45th parallel or along the Continental Divide.
Yeah,
now, I mean, what would a skeptic say to that? I mean, that doesn't sound like, you know, making it up.
No, I look at the sighting reports differently. I don't look at them as science. I don't look at them as scientific data. Once again, because I assume that these are people and they're intelligent. I assume that you can't really do science on them because you can't drag them into a lab, you can't get a body. Bigfoot is under intelligent control. That's what I assume. I assume that they're under intelligent control, which is how they can lay so low and stay out of sight and why it's so hard to get a photo of them. Because I know they're real, like I was saying before from my own experiences. And so once I assume that they're under intelligent control, I look at the sighting reports as intelligence. I figure what all those sighting reports are isn't scientific data at all, but it's intelligence gathered about another intelligent species. And so then I read every one of those sighting reports and I go, look at the intelligence that's being gathered. Look, people are knocking logs against trees and getting answers. You know, look, people are talking about weird things like glowing eyes. Look at this, look at that. So I find that the sighting reports are useful as a body of intelligence because these are people that have interacted and encountered these beings. And then when you get to that level of things, see, I think the Indians are much better, or I prefer the Indians' intelligence. They've been gathering intelligence on these guys for thousands of years, whereas modern Eurocentric civilization has only been gathering it for, 50 years? Something like that. So that's what I think sighting reports are. It's like, yeah, they're not data at all, and no scientist will tell you they're data. They'll always say, but on the other hand, we all know how useful they are because, we all browse through them and go, look, they like apples, Look, they eat deer. Wow. So there's a lot that can be learned from sighting reports. It's just that I believe strongly that one cannot confuse gathering intelligence with obtaining scientific evidence. That's really the point I'm trying to make.
Right.
All right. Let's. We've went for an hour. Henry, you've done a great job. You've made our job easy because we haven't had to ask.
I hope I haven't bored you guys. I mean,
I've been intently listening. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off to a quick commercial break. On our way back from the commercial, I'm going to play everybody a song that Henry actually wrote. Now, did you perform it too, Henry, or is it just something you wrote?
Yes, I play the drums.
Okay. I'm going to play a song on the way back then from commercial. And
I'm one of the two vocalists. I'm the guy, not the girl, right?
Okay.
I'm glad you pointed that out.
I just want to make that clear.
So we'll go to a quick commercial break, and then everyone listen to the song because he's actually telling a story, a famous story. It's pretty interesting. So we will go to a break, and on the way back, we will catch up with Henry again, and then we'll start taking phone calls. So we'll be right back, folks.
Sasquatch Watch Radio. Stay tuned.
Are you tired of the same old boring radio? Looking for something with a bit of an edge? Then sit down, strap in, and hold on tight, for you're about to be taken beyond the edge.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Let's get ready to rumble! It's Down and Dirty Paranormal Talk Radio that takes you beyond the edge. Join us here on Blog Talk Radio Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern for Beyond the Edge Radio, as we interview the everyday investigator to the seasoned researcher. From ghosts and hauntings, demonology, UFO and alien life forms, cryptozoology, psychic phenomenon, and other mysteries and unusual anomalies. Paranormal Talk Radio that goes beyond the edge, and it's right here every Friday night at 9 as we take you from the boring everyday normal into the world of the paranormal. Think you're brave enough? Then lock your doors, open your minds, and join us if you dare. Beyond the Edge Radio, Friday nights 9 p.m. Eastern, only on Blog Talk Radio. Beyond the Edge Radio is an anomalous entertainment production. Check us out at beyondtheedgeradio.com.
The story goes like this. There were these two guys that went canoeing, and they came to a place where they had to portage, carry their canoes overland. They walked through the woods until night fell, and they set up camp. Well, one of the guys woke up in the middle of the night to answer, the call of nature.
Yeah, what else you call it?
And he saw that the side of the tent was bowed inward as if someone was leaning on it. But his buddy reached up to touch the tent wall, and it was ice cold.
Well, you know,
He was so scared, he just lay there until morning, not sleeping, and apparently not answering the call of nature.
infrared.
When day came, the thing outside was gone. So the two guys packed up their gear, and they got their canoe and headed off again. They walked all day, and when the sun was setting, they came upon an old Indian man holding a human skull and shaking beads in it. He said to him, "You can't stay here. This is Wendigo territory.
You know,
Get through it as quickly as you can." Well, you know, of course, being stupid white guys,
They're the
they
brains
laughed at
of the
him and
world,
kept walking.
you know,
Well, the sun
gardeners,
went down, and all of a sudden,
caretakers,
somewhere behind them in the woods, they heard this
stewards,
horrible scream. It could only have been the old Indian. They looked at each other, kind of freaked out, and they started walking a little quicker. And then behind them, they heard this huge crashing noise, like a runaway bulldozer coming through the woods. They looked around, and there was nothing there. But the trees were splintering and crashing down in the path as something horrible and invisible. Well, they dropped their canoe and all their gear, and they just ran like hell. They kept running until they dropped from sheer
They turn
exhaustion.
invisible and they block
And the
the
thing behind
optical
them came
wavelengths
howling
of
up,
the electromagnetic
stopped,
or electrostatic
crashed around for a
spectrum.
while in frustration. But it couldn't get them because they had reached the far edge of its territory.
No, that's not why.
What do you think?
That's a bunch of bull.
All right, well, there you have it, people. Henry, that's definitely an interesting, different song.
I'm a different sort of fellow.
I liked it because it was kind of proggy.
I've been labeled prog rock. That's something I wrote in 1996, and it's based on the Algernon Blackwood Wendigo story, and it's with these great musicians, these prog musicians, prog rock monster Hugh Hopper and Fred Challenor and Elaine DeFalco. And I've just always been a prog rock guy. What can I say? You know, it comes naturally to me. And I really like just that sort of music. And it's sort of like my Bigfoot world. I'm destined to just only have like a small audience. Only a small demographic that really likes what I do.
Well, I guess what we'll do at this point then, Henry, since we passed the hour mark, we'll go ahead and open up the phone lines, start taking some callers.
Oh, great.
So this will be the fun part of the show. The call-in number tonight, folks, is area code 347-237-5070. Again, that number is 347-237-5070. Ooh, we got callers already. Let's see here. I think I know who this is. This, I believe, is Mr. Henry May.
That would be me, Billy. How you doing?
Good. I understand that Henry was on your show last night.
Yes, he was, and he was a great guest.
Thank you, Henry.
Yeah, no problem, Henry.
There's not that many Henrys in the Bigfoot world.
No, there's not. I think there's only the two of us.
I'm proud to be one of the two Henrys.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you, and I didn't get a chance to ask you about this last night. I wanted to ask about the IVBC. How that came about, and
I'm glad you asked that question because there's something relevant today that I should say about it. The very first Bigfoot in the very beginning of the internet, there was no web. There was a thing called Usenet, which was a NNTP feed. It was network news.
Mm-hmm.
alt.bigfoot.research was created by Silas Salmonberry and myself. but Silas actually took the lead. He was a Kootenai Indian, and I'm part Indian. And he and I created this as a serious place to discuss Bigfoot because we were both using Bigfoot as a way to get in touch with our Indian roots and our Indian heritage. And that's actually how it started. Now, Usenet was really on its way out in 1993, and the web had just been invented. So when there were 500 websites, I created the IVBC, the Internet Virtual Bigfoot Conference. It was the first Bigfoot discussion forum. There weren't many forums at all at that time, there being only 500 websites, period. So it really was a place for everybody else. I was the moderator, and I was tolerant of kooks because I personally was a kook, but I also really promoted a hard science view. You know, I insisted that people be solid thinker, you know, solid logic with evidence, and you know, I in many ways foreshadowed the kind of attitudes that moderators have today on forums. I can see that some of my judgmental tendencies from that time have carried forth. Now, the thing about the IVBC is I got totally sick of it. By 1998, I wanted nothing to do with publicizing Bigfoot or convincing others or institutional science, so I shut it down, and some hijacker guys from Eastern Europe copied the web page, and I believe they still host it now, but of course none of the buttons on it work. But they took like the overall page and they made it some kind of, you know, virus shareware, who knows what the heck is actually on that page if you click on anything. None of the stuff that was there is there. And so I did an interview about a month ago where someone said, well, I'm on the IVBC now, and I'm like, no, I killed that in 1998. That's just some squatter that's like grabbed the page and is hosting it in Romania. I think it's sad that the IVBC still floats around the net in some form, but it was the first discussion group, and we did. I have to say, we had to ban Eric Beckyard.
Oh boy!
On the very first discussion group on the internet, Eric Beckyard was banned. Yes. Exactly. No, because I had no tolerance for that, and I got into a huge fight with him over the years, too. I'm sure a lot of people did. I mean, I don't want to bring up a dead horse. I don't want to flog a dead horse, literally.
Yeah.
But I never would have written my book if Eric Beckyard was alive. I never would have come out and come forth with any of the things that I have in my book if Eric Beckyard was still alive. That was one of the main inhibitions to me.
Mhm. Oh yeah. Well, anyway,
right.
that's pretty much all I wanted to ask about because I didn't get a chance to do it last night.
Well, that's the story in a nutshell. You know, it's two Indians, or an Indian and a half actually started it, because Silas started it with me when we killed the alt.bigfoot.research news group. We both ran the IVBC for a while. Then Silas got smart first, and he abandoned it, you know, a few months later. I carried it on for 5 years.
Mhm. Well, like I said, that's the only question I really wanted to ask. And thank you again, Henry. And
you're very welcome.
Like I said, the book is great. And by the way, JC says he's the best.
I swear, JC just has to put everybody up to saying that he's the world's best Bigfooter. I tell you what.
Yep. All right,
Henry,
guys. I'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you.
Yep.
Henry, if you want to make a friend real fast, just say John Cartwright is the best Bigfooter in the world, and he will, he'll love you.
Later, guys.
John Cartwright, huh?
John Cartwright.
Must be one of the new generation.
He's definitely he had a sighting way back in 1982 in North Carolina. Real good friend of mine. He he's got a pretty vivid description of what he saw. So.
Well, that happens to people. People have they have these experiences. They have these sightings. They have these interactions. It can really shock you and change your life.
Oh, it definitely changed his.
Sounds like it.
All right, let me get another caller here that we got on the line. Let's see. Let me make sure I grab this one. Area code 651. You're on the air.
Hi, everybody. Billy and DB is the elusive one with the Minnesota Bigfoot Research Team. How you guys doing?
Good.
Hey, great.
Good. Good. Say, I'm calling again because I talked to Henry last night on HBM's Cryptic Corner just for a short time. There is a couple more questions that I have thought of asking you, Henry, if you don't mind.
Oh, no problem. I felt like I was a little abrupt last night. I really didn't explain myself very well.
Okay, not a problem. I do have some team members listening in here tonight as well. So I was wondering, you were ranking the states and everything, and I was wondering if you could go over the state of Minnesota and where it's ranking, and where you would look in the state of Minnesota, and why you would look in the state of Minnesota again.
Okay. Hang on.
Okay. Yeah, I know you got to go through your book or hop on the website there again.
Yeah. This is the point where we can plug the fact that if you buy Henry's book, you can do this for yourself. You can actually look these things up for yourself.
If you buy my book, you too can look. One of the things about my book is that for the people like you, it's 175 pages of color, 60 color maps, and 175 pages of text. Then there's 163 pages of tables, state by state, breaking out the exact coordinates of every place in every state and province. And it's compatible with Google Earth, so that you can take the coordinates right out of the appendix of my book, plug them into Google Earth, and look at each place. Because, of course, Google Earth is like the greatest map ever. So
yeah, I'm really going to have to check your book out.
So let me tell you, the thing about Minnesota is you got a lot of places named Devil that I'm not too sure about. You have one named Devil Track Lake. Now, Devil Track Lake, I would be really, and another place named Devil Track River. Now, when I see the terms Devil Track, I think Bigfoot. Okay? When I see that in a place name. So those are two places I would look in a heartbeat in Minnesota. Devil Track Lake and Devil Track River. Now, you've got a lot of Devilfish Lake, Devilfish Lookout Tower, you got a lot of stuff. Now, another place I would look in a heartbeat is Little Wampus Lake, because here in Oregon, the Wampus is pretty much an early logger term for Bigfoot. And I explain that in my book in the chapter on the Wampus. And all the different Wampus places are here in Oregon, up in the Cascades. In fact, almost all of them are in the highest peaks of the Cascade Mountains. And you have Little Wampus Lake in Minnesota, and I believe you also have, you have Wampus Lake as well in Minnesota. So I would make a beeline to Devil Track Lake, Devil Track River, Little Wampus Lake, and Wampus Lake. You also have a Lake Windigo. I would go there in a heartbeat, because anything named Windigo is kind of like a winner. You also have 3 places named Bushman Lake. And as you know, the Athabascan Indians far north of you refer to this being as the Bushman. Now, where else? God, I mean, you've got Spirit Lakes all over the place. And Spirit Lakes are always, in my world, if it was named Spirit by Indians, it's likely that it has something to do with Bigfoot, or at least there's a strong chance of it. If it was named Spirit like the Holy Spirit by modern Christians, no, and that's the same thing with sighting reports. It's like some of these are going to be spot on, and that's where Bigfoot's going to be hanging around, and some of these are going to be wrong. And that's one of the things with my book is when you're interpreting place names, you can't always guarantee that you're right. Here in Oregon, I've been able to do a lot of research in libraries where there's a lot of specific places that I've tracked down the story behind them. I've never been able to do that very well in Minnesota. That's something for the future. You know, I'll do that down the thing. Now, one of the places that I would go also in a heartbeat in your state is a place called Wendigo Island. Well, when I see the word Wendigo, like that rock song from before, and island, well, I sure think I'd make a beeline there. Those are the top places I'd go. You've got some ancient names like Kemp Lake. Kemp Lake used to be called Wendigo Lake. So you've got a lot of things and Mill Locks Lake used to be called Devil Lake. So you've got some, how do I put it? You've got some historical names that are no longer in current use that would guide you in other places in Minnesota.
Okay. Have you, not to throw out the subject or anything like that, I mean, there's over 10,000 lakes here in Minnesota. I'm sure there's a lot more that you could say about lakes and everything like that. I don't want to be rude. But I was wondering, have you ever seen Bigfoot or Sasquatch in quadruped mode on all fours?
No, I never have.
Okay.
That's just one of those things. Actually, yeah, in my book, I have the specific GPS coordinates of every one of these. And you're right. Even here, there's like, I skipped past it, but there's a dozen Devil Lakes. There's, 2 dozen Spirit Lakes. And it looks like 3 distinct Wampus Lakes, actually. And at least 5 distinct Wendigo places. So, yeah, you've got up there and all that water, all those lakes. They seem to like it.
Yeah, and in the summertime it's pretty nice, too. And then you were talking about ranking the states, and I think we talked briefly and touched on that briefly last night. I short-term memory, sorry about that. What is the ranking for the state of Minnesota again?
Well, do you want John Green or the BFRO?
I want to take John Green.
Okay. John Green has, when you adjust it like that, John Green, 16 out of 60. So the 10 provinces and the 50 states, you're the 16th most likely place to see him, which is pretty high. That's pretty high.
Good deal. And one last question. What did you think about the people that supposedly had that Bigfoot Georgia body hoax, the one with they had the Bigfoot in the freezer? I was just wondering what your opinion on them would be.
Well, that's a leading question. To tie in with what I was saying before this phone call earlier in this interview, I believe these guys are people that bury their own dead. So whenever I see any story of a body, I immediately believe it's a fraud. I just jump to immediate conclusion, that's a fraud. That cannot be. Now, it just so happens that every time in history, including this most recent time, that anyone has ever claimed to have a body, it has been shown to be a fraud eventually. I happen to learn from history, and I say it's a fraud every time because I just believe in my assumptions as opposed to the assumptions that it's an animal and it's a regular animal and people are going to find a body. I think they're not going to find a body. So that's A. And B is, I'm a real historian of Bigfoot. I mean, I hung out with all those early guys and helped create the Bigfoot world you all live in today. I had a hand in it.
Appreciate that.
I've been familiar with Tom Biscardi, who has like hoaxed things like 4 times, starting with Ivan Marx. And so the fact that no one's a student of history in modern times and didn't immediately go, Thomas Biscardi again? I mean, come on, you know, I'm just amazed at how gullible the modern generation is, because we've all been through this with him a few times before. But it just seems that there's, in the world of Bigfoot, there's a loss of history. There's not, I guess, a lot of people like me that live that history and are still involved with it and still talking about it, or who come back and say, hey, wow, you know, Tom Biscardi has pulled this routine endlessly. I was really shocked that he got so much traction. I really was. And I was like, oh, my God, you know, there's just no perspective. Nobody has any experience. Nobody, like, you know, I just was stunned. So there's two strong, those are 2 strong things that happened to me when I heard that story. And so I wasn't fooled for a heartbeat, because I always say any story of a body is a fraud, period.
Yeah, okay. Do you think
I learned that the hard way.
I hear you there. Do you think that one day we'll ever find a body by digging? Or, I mean, I know science wants to prove to science it has to have a body. For people like me, we just want to get these things protected. How do you think the best way of getting these creatures protected would be without having a body?
No, they're not. They don't need your protection, A, and B, no one's ever going to find a body until they themselves decide, oh, let's let the humans have a body. Because I think they're completely in control of their dead, and they take care of their own dead. And I like to make the analogy of if your grandmother died, would you leave her out in the field for the wild dogs to rip apart?
Exactly.
No.
I know what you're saying.
You know, and I think that's the assumption I make. Now, I know this is at odds with 99% of everybody, but the assumption I make is that's how they feel about it. They would say, no, that's my grandma there. I'm not going to let the humans dissect her or vivisect her or anything like this. Jesus Christ, you know. So I think that that's their attitude, in short, is they're never going to let anybody get their hands on a body until they feel like it. I think that it's under the Bigfoot contacts are under intelligent control. I mean, accidents happen, we all know that, but it should be clear to everybody now that they don't want us to have a body.
Okay. Well, that's all. That's the only questions I really had. I thank you again for taking the time and taking my call and answering my question.
Well, thank you for letting me express my rather antithetical views too.
Hey, not a problem. Always, you're a good guest and great speaker.
But I just have my own,
Yep. And I'd like to say thanks again to Billy and DB, and everybody pay attention to next Monday's show. I hear they got a great guest coming on.
That's what I heard too.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, we had another caller on the line, but his phone went dead, so he just sent me a quick message. He wants me to ask you a question, Henry. His question,
fire away.
Actually, he wants to know, what is your stance? I'm sure you've heard this since you've come back into the Bigfoot field. It's always
my stance.
Yeah, your stance on kill or no kill.
Oh, boy. Yet another, this is yet another issue that I think is a false choice. And I just have a whole different level that I approach it on. I think that's yet another fantasy that the lack of data affords. That people actually think that they're going to kill one. If they kill one, I think that here Indians tell stories. Commonly, the story that is told by many tribes here in the Northwest, and there's many different variations of it, but the basic form is this. An Indian kills a Sasquatch. And the Sasquatch come out and they kill the entire branch of that guy's tribe except for one person to tell the story. And they have a terrible temper. And you can't really get their temper excited too much most of the time, as we all know. You know, they're not known for ripping people to bits. But according to the Indians that live here, you can piss them off, and if you do, by shooting one, for example, there are very dire consequences. They have a very bad temper. Now, this is somewhat antithetical and at odds with the view that they're friendly, happy giants all the time. But that's what the Indian intelligence is on the situation. If you mess with these guys, they can kill you with a thought, basically, is what it comes down to. Now, they don't kill you with a thought most of the time, but there is that chance. So I could tell a number of stories along these lines, but basically, I think that the kill note, you know, I don't think anybody's, if anyone, so I guess what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is, if anybody does kill one, they're dead, probably within 2 minutes. I don't think these guys are alone that much. I think a lot of times they're hanging around in groups.
I tend to agree with you on that, Henry.
You know, I think that's what's going to happen. I think, you know, if somebody does actually do it, they're toast, man, you know. And that's what the Indians tell me is, hey, they're toast. You know, and I believe them on that. Now, secondarily, I don't think anybody's really going to get a shot. I mean, they might. It could happen, I suppose. You know, accidents do happen, and somebody might get a shot. But that's highly unlikely because of which I explain in my book, because of the puzzling powers they have to stay out of sight. They have a lot of ways, in my view, of staying out of sight. And they have a basic ability to read your intention field, is what I also think. That they can basically read your intent at quite a distance. And this is part of why no one's ever shot one. They really have really good defense mechanisms for dealing with us in particular.
What you just said brings up a question in my mind as soon as I heard you say it. When you say that they can read your intentions, Henry, are you saying that from a distance they can see your intent by your facial features, or are you saying...
No, I'm of the school of vitalism and Rupert Sheldrake. And what that means is I think that your cats and your dogs, outside of your sight, outside of line of sight, in the next room, when you're down the block, can read your intention. I think that basically animals, a lot of animals, can do this. We can do this. We can sometimes read intent fields of a wild animal, and a lot of times our conscious mind doesn't really let us believe that happened, you know. But this is just a really strange, I think it's a pretty common ability, actually, and it is a psychic ability, or at least that's what people call it. But I think it's a fundamental ability that a lot of animals have, and I think that the Siako, as I call them, the Indian name for Bigfoot here in the Chinook tribe, I think they've got it in spades. So I think that your dog, there's a book by Rupert Sheldrake named 7 Experiments That Could Change the World, where he describes experiments you can do with your dog to prove to yourself that your dog can read your intentions at a distance without seeing your face. And it's a very interesting book to actually read because it's all about just doing really simple experiments at home with your pets and showing you that your pets actually have psychic abilities.
Well, you know, it's funny that you bring that up because the first thing I think of when you say that is an episode that come on TV that involved Jane Goodall, and it was a bird that this lady owns. I don't know if you saw that episode.
No, I didn't know.
It's an episode called I believe it was called When Animals Talk. And Jane Goodall was the one who hosted the program, and this lady has a bird, and I can't remember what state she lived in, and this bird could recall, this is way out in left field for me too, okay, so understand it's hard for me to grasp this, but this bird could tell everything. When Jane was showing her pictures, and she was in an entirely different room from the bird, Jane would show the lady pictures, and the bird in the next room, which was out of eye contact, would say what she was looking at in the pictures.
Well, you see, this form of science has been rejected since the 1920s. It was once called vitalism, and it really allowed for the existence of psychic energy and ESP and that sort of thing, because it said that basically there was an invisible energy that couldn't be measured, that was like psychic energy, and that all living things had this, that part of what made a living thing was that it was animated by this vital life force, like Star Trek, or not Star Trek, Star Wars, the Force, Luke Skywalker. So this school of thought has been crushed out of existence by the mechanistic and reductionist dominance in science today, which really comes from an old philosopher, René Descartes, who was the first one to propose that the universe was a big machine, and that you could understand it by just understanding everything as a big machine and understanding life itself as a big machine. And we see today that institutional science is still driving to try to understand life as just a bunch of chemical processes and DNA and physics. And they're trying to explain life using just chemistry and physics. Whereas the vitalists said, no, things are really alive. The universe is alive. It's not a machine. It's a huge organism. And we're alive. And things that are living are animated by life energy. And you can't measure life energy with physics and chemistry. So when one looks at the thing you just described with the bird in the next room and Jane Goodall looking at pictures and some kind of evidence of the bird somehow communicating through the wall with Jane,
right,
you wind up with confusion if you're trying to explain that it's just chemistry and physics. But if you're trying to say that, no, Jane and the bird are actually living beings, and like the Indians say, everything is alive, and because they are alive, they can communicate using this life energy in a way that cannot be measured by chemistry and physics, because they're both part of the big, the great creator, or the great spirit. I mean, they're both animated by the same living energy. And since they both are self-aware and self-conscious because of this living energy, that living energy is connected between those two animals that look discrete and look like they're completely separate. But on the level of this living energy, they're not so separate. They're both animated by the same energy. So I hope I didn't make this completely bizarre and everything, but see, once upon a time, there was this school of thought in science up through the 1920s that tried to explain things using this invisible life force. And these guys got poo-pooed, and in the big science battles, they got crushed. And the guys that try to study DNA and who believe that any day now, they're going to show you how that you can be aware and self-conscious and be a living organism looking just at the chemical and physical processes that are going on the molecular level. And I don't think they'll ever get there. I think that's a religious dream that institutional science has. It's very analogous to the institutional dream that Bigfooters have, that a body will show up any day. It's kind of like you need to have this belief in order to keep going, because that's the religious side of it. There is no evidence that scientists are going to be able to prove how you're alive and I'm alive and how you're aware and I'm aware using just chemistry and physics. But they think they're going to do it any day now. And it's the same with Bigfooters who think they can't prove that it's just an animal like every other animal and everything's just like they expect. But they think they're going to get a body any day now. And so both of those ideas are really linked, because they're both linked by René Descartes. They both think that everything's just a big machine. You know, if they do get a body, they're going to convince institutional science, because they'll have a body and then they'll have DNA, and they're going to be able to say, look, it's a real living creature. Granted, I have to say, okay, there's going to be people that are convinced when you actually have a tissue sample in your hand. They're going to say, wow, that's a real tissue sample. But if you look at it one step further, you see that you're not going to know anything about their culture or the way they interact or how they behave or how they're self-aware or what they think about or feel. You're not going to know any of that from a body. You're not going to know a thing about where they live from a body. You're not going to know much at all. Now, there's hopefully going to be, I imagine that the dream is, we're going to convince all kinds of people that it's real. And see, I just don't even feel like doing that. I think that that's a fool's errand, and that people should just try to convince themselves. Don't convince others. Go out, be a weirdo, go up to the top of a mountain and stay up all night. Find out for yourself. I think that you'll get further if you just try to find out for yourself than if you try to drag institutional science into it. I don't think they really they don't want to move in with full force at this time. And I would say it'll be a long time before they ever do. Anyhow, I hope I didn't go too far. I hope I answered your question, Eeks.
I think it was fine. Let me, we've got another caller that's been holding on here, so let me get them on the line. Caller from the 936 area code, you're on the air.
How you doing, Billy?
This must be Ron Losey down in Tennessee.
No, you're off by a couple of states. It's Smiter over in Texas.
Go on it, you two sound alike. Oh, my gosh.
I just wanted to ask 2 or 3 questions of your guest, Henry, if he
Sure.
doesn't mind.
Go right ahead. Please, sir.
Henry, I'm asking for your opinion on this. If you open your eyes and really look at what's going on around you in the woods, how hard is it, in your opinion, to find the hairy folks?
I don't know. I mean, that's almost an impossible question to answer.
Well, I mean, how hard is it to find out if they're in the area or not?
Oh, I think that could be, that also could be easy or hard. Here's what I think. I think it's an individual thing, and that they don't treat us like we're just a bunch of cows and we're all the same. They acknowledge some people, and they don't acknowledge other people. So some people can go into the woods, and I know plenty of loggers, for example, around where I live, that go into the woods for their whole lives, and they never see a Bigfoot.
I'm guessing that depends greatly on their mindset.
Yeah, it does. That's what I'm saying. It's like their intention, their intent field, I think has something to do with it. If you're going out and you're looking for a Bigfoot, I think that who you are and what your intentions are is a big factor in whether or not they let you know they're around. I really believe that. I think it has a lot to do with who the individual person is and what their intentions really are. And I don't think you can fool them I think that if you've got some kind of bad intentions or intentions they don't agree with, you may not get any idea that there's 10 of them, 100 feet from you. But then on the other hand, there's plenty of times where, some person will go out and, bring a bunch of oranges in a basket and knock on a tree, and then they'll start getting tree knocks and things like that. Or, there's a lot of times that they do just acknowledge. I can't tell why they acknowledge some people and not others. I don't understand why some people get, like, a friendlier reaction than others. And I'm shocked that, in fact, the BFRO has had the success it's had, where a number of their expedition members have had encounters. I would not have expected that. I would have expected a lot less. So I was surprised that they were in the mood to joke around with people and actually, like, acknowledge them.
Okay.
So, I can't really answer your question better than that. I can just say I think it really matters who the person is. I know...
You answered my question fine.
Oh, okay, good.
That's really kind of what I was looking for, because I've been saying that same thing for months. But my next question is, do you liken them more to an ape or liken them more to a type of people?
People. I'm a people guy.
Okay.
The Indians that I'm friends with are, basically the tribes here look at them as a tribe of Indians with puzzling powers. If I can generalize, and that's really a generalization, that's what they look at them as. And so I'm a definite people guy, too. My personal experiences indicate to me that they're people-like more than ape-like. But like us, they're big hominids, so, we can act like apes,
Oh, yeah, you could pick up the paper and see that every day, but...
That's right. You can go downtown and find that, boy, it's, we're capable of acting like total wild animals ourselves, so when I see reports about them acting like wild animals, I'm never really convinced that they are wild animals by those reports.
Well, what I'll say now is that you're saying basically the same thing that Kiwani Lapsaritis is saying, the author of Psychic Sasquatch. And there's other people.
I'm a little edgy about being associated with Kiwani.
Oh, I understand. You're saying similar things to him, though, and
I know I am.
You're saying similar things, and this is based on your own experience. I'm not assuming you've copied anyone, but you're saying the same similar things that Janice Carter has said in her own research, and also Mary Green, and some other people that don't come forward or haven't written a book or haven't been on any TV show that have said the same thing to me in their own experiences. So,
this is something I believe you will find more of, because I really believe that people have experiences like they see a Bigfoot cross the road 200 yards away, and they go, hey, I saw a Bigfoot cross the road. But when you encounter one at 10 feet, then weird stuff happens. And so I guess what I'm saying is I really believe that the present may belong to the ape point of view. But it does belong to it. Here at the present, the ape point of view is dominant. But I believe that the future will belong to the human point of view and the people point of view, because I think as people get closer and closer and have actual experiences like I've had, they can't help but conclude, geez, these guys are like people. They're not like apes.
You're preaching to the choir on the up-close experience.
Okay, see, that's where I'm saying is people like you, like people like that actually have these up-close experiences, they're weirder than they expect. If they go into it going, wow, it's an ape, it's a bear, they go, holy moly, no, it's not. So I just think that's a natural evolution of things, that as all these Bigfoot researchers actually get out in the mountains and actually have some encounter, it'll be weirder than they expected, and they'll come around, I think, to my point of view eventually. Now, I may be dreaming. I may be 3 generations down the road, but
I think some of it has to do with perhaps your previous experiences. Myself, as early as 20 years old, I had experiences with ghosts, and I wasn't by myself. Other people had those same experiences, so apparently there's something going on.
good things were weird when you were young.
Yeah, and then you become immune to it. It's like, oh, okay, it's going to be one of those days, and you just take it in stride at that point.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
I've had
there's no sense overly obsessed with it, really.
Yeah, I've had up close experiences. What surprises me is how a hairy man that large can move that fast. I think that's what surprised me the most.
Really? What surprised me the most was how smart they were. But
I never assumed they weren't smart. I mean, they're a bipedal primate, so I went with the premise when I walked into the woods, based on what we know about great apes, that they're 5 to 7-year-old human intelligence level, that they would be somewhere between 12 to 15-year-old intelligence level. And I'm sure we've all met some very intelligent 12 to 15-year-old children in our own society, so I wasn't shortchanging them on their intelligence or anything.
That's good. I think that's a good assumption not to make, I think, because I think many people assume they're dumber than they are.
Yeah, I have a recording where I was in the woods trying different things for 45 minutes, and I left the recorder there. And 5 minutes after I walked out of the woods, rocks started being collected around the recorder. So I have to wonder how close they were to me on that night that I was in the woods trying to record things and see if I could get a response. Because after I left the woods, just 5 minutes after I left the woods, that's when things started happening on the recorder.
Well, I really do think they show you what they want to show you a lot of times. I mean, accidents do happen, but they wanted you to know that they were around after you left. That would be how I interpreted that.
Yeah, but the funny part is, Henry, I placed food on the chair and the recorder right next to it. Before I placed the recorder down, I held it up and said, "This is mine. I would appreciate it if you don't destroy it or steal it." I left it on the chair. And it was the only thing on the chair the next morning. And I have just a whole lot of stuff on that recorder.
Good for you. You're getting out there. Clearly, you're one of those people that's going to spend a lot of time out in the woods looking for these guys.
The thing is, I don't look for them. I make it known that I'm in the woods, and if they want to come around me, that's their choice. But it's always their choice.
Yeah, I think you're right in that. I think it is always their choice.
Yeah. So anyway, I've taken up enough of your show, Billy. I just wanted to say thank you, Henry, for coming on and saying everything you have said, because I've been saying the very same thing for months, and I have been called crazy 9 ways to Sunday. Sorry to say it like that, but...
Yeah, they've called me worse names than that. Yeah. Well, keep the faith.
All right. Thanks for calling in, Smiter.
Thanks, Billy. You have a good night.
You too. DB has a ton of questions. Go for it, DB.
Well,
The floor is yours.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a ton, but they might be questions that take a while to answer. Let me ask this one from Reverend Strone first, because it's a question that a lot of people probably have in the forefront of their minds, and that has to do, Henry, with the story of the starter motor that gets blown out. And Reverend Strone's question is, what led you to believe that the Bigfoot had anything to do with the starter motor blowing out? And I know the answer to the question, and it's a long one, so you decide whether you want to get into it or not.
The smell. There's two things. Where I was, which was way out in the Cascade Mountains, where the evil god of the woods lived, and the second thing is the smell that was on the air. Mm-hmm. I suddenly was overpowered with a wet dog, basically a wet dog type smell, but it was really pungent like a skunk, and it almost stung like burning bakelite, and it was sweet. It wasn't foul like a skunk. It was actually kind of a sweet smell, but it was really strong, and it was really like a wet dog, so that your mind immediately got the picture of a big hairy animal, just from the smell alone. And I know a lot of people have had that experience where they've smelled these guys, and it's really clearly an animal smell. You know, I mean, it's a flesh and blood animal smell. It's a real pungent thing, and so really that's what, like, it convinced my reptilian brain immediately, my medulla oblongata or whatever, you know, like on a certain level physically, I was like, oh my God, that's a big hairy thing. Mm-hmm. Even though I didn't see anything. And then the second part is that I wasn't really at first really convinced it was a Bigfoot. I was just like, oh man, I think that was a Bigfoot. I didn't see anything, but whatever it was had, you know, tremendous psychic power and wiped out my starter motor and knocked my wife out and made my hair stand up. And I said, gee, that's strange. Now, later, I met Indians that made the connection for me that said, oh, you ran into the Siadko, which is, as I mentioned before, Indian name for Bigfoot. And some of them said that the story of that valley was that the Siadko adolescents had to jump in front of a human being on the trail and wave their hands right in front of its face without the human seeing them. And this was a ritual that the tribe used to make the adolescents do before they became adult members of the tribe. So I had a Clackamas Indian explain this whole story to me about how they had this long tradition of the adolescent Big Feet jumping in front of them on trails up this very same valley and doing this thing, waving their hands invisibly in front of them. And they were telling me a Bigfoot story. And of course, I connected that myth with my experience real easily. And I said, you know, that was a Bigfoot. That was a Siadko. So, you know, it was basically Indians helped me interpret my experience, whereas science did not. Science just told me I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
But at least the Indians had a good story to explain it, you know.
Right. Well, Reverend Strone is continuing to ask, but he doesn't understand why the motor dying would necessarily be caused by the Bigfoot. But he doesn't know the rest of your story. And I would say, Reverend Strone, I actually interviewed Henry for 3.5 hours just last week.
Oh my God.
And this story is in the interview. You remember that? I'm sure you remember that.
Let me just do the obligatory shameless plug. It's in my book in great detail.
That's right.
Sorry.
Yep. And it's also in the interview.
www.henryfranzoni.com. So, yes, please. You can find the whole story in my book. But yeah, there's a lot more than just the blown starter motor that occurred all at once. One of the things was that I really felt Bigfoot's mind the first time, and I felt. There's a lot of reports. Let me back up. There's a lot of reports where people say Bigfoot was looking at me, or I felt something was looking at me. I felt looked at. I felt like I was being watched. Well, I felt like I was under an electron microscope because I could feel the mind of this, whatever it was that I couldn't see, like probing me and just going through me and actually like checking me out. And while this was happening, my hair, which was about 5 inches long at the time, was standing out straight in all directions like Albert Einstein or like a guy touching an electrical socket or something. I mean, a powerful charge of static electricity accompanied this feeling that it was a personal experience of having this very powerful mind scan me. And while this happened, my wife immediately was knocked unconscious. My hair stood out straight like someone had rubbed balloons on it and held them over my head, and my starter motor was blown. So a powerful electrostatic field accompanied the smell, and when the smell went away, the electrostatic field went away. They were linked together. They appeared together and they left together, even though I didn't see anything. So experience being like one of those experiences you just are left with and you have to interpret yourself, became my first Bigfoot experience. Even though I just smelled something and experienced something that blew my starter motor, knocked my wife out, and scanned me and made my hair stand up. Like I said,
right.
when I found Indians that said, "Oh, hey, you just ran, they're jokers. Hey, they were just playing with you." I was relieved. I was relieved a lot by the Indians just putting my mind at rest. I realized I wasn't completely crazy. Luckily, my wife was with me too, but she missed most of it because she got knocked out.
Right.
Anyhow, I'm sorry. That's the sort of long form there.
Yeah. And we have more questions, and let's see if we can squeeze a couple more in here. Bipedalist wanted to know if you would tell us what your best sighting was, when you got the clearest view or something like that.
It's a very interesting thing. I'd say my best sighting was one night I was driving in the Coast Range of Oregon where I live with my wife, and I was on a logging road. In the Coast Range, the mountains aren't very high, but they're very steep and the terrain's very severe. But the mountains range between 1,000 and 3,000 feet. They're small for Oregon. But you still feel like you're in a tremendous wilderness when you're in the Coast Range because the trees are big and there's nothing around and it's really severe. So for no apparent reason that I know of, I suddenly turned the car 90 degrees on the logging road and pointed the headlights into the woods, straight at a Sasquatch, like from my subconscious. Like I wasn't even conscious. I don't know why I did it, but I just happened to pull the car 90 degrees and stop dead, and there was a Sasquatch about 15 feet in front of me.
Wow.
In the headlights. And I turned the headlights off. And when I turned the headlights off, and bipedalists will probably like this, the green eyes that the Sasquatch had glowed green. And they glowed green after I turned the lights off, when there was no light at all where I was, because I was in the deep woods in the middle of the night. And there really was no light, and yet there was light coming from the eyes of this guy, and they were green. And my wife said, "Predator eyes."
Oh, boy.
That's all she said, okay? And I was like, yeah, they did look like predator eyes, because they did look like predator eyes. They were scary looking. And I don't know why. It was just like almost an accident. I'm sort of convinced my subconscious must have just said, okay, turn left right now and stop. But I just did that once, and just out of the blue. And, it was kind of like a fluke, but that turned out to be the closest actual sighting I ever had. Because usually in my experiences, when they're really close to me, they're invisible. Like the first time. So, it's weird, but that's probably the best sighting I ever had. And it was kind of accidental.
Yeah, it's a good one, and it's also got weirdness in it, like all the other ones that you tell about. And
I don't know. Yeah, it's weird because I was just kind of like, my wife and I were just out for a night drive. We do that a lot, actually. We drive around, and the thoughts in our heads, hey, maybe we'll see, here in Oregon, when you drive in the mountains, that thought's always in the back of your head.
Right.
Hey, real quick, DB, while we're still live, we've only got about 50 seconds left. Folks, next week, join us, and we're going to have a fellow by the name of William who goes by Bipedalist in the chat room. He's from North Carolina. We're going to have him on the show next week, so tune in for that. Okay, now you can continue.
If you'd like my book, www.henryfranzoni, spelled HenryFranzoni.com/ITSOS.html. That's the web page for my book. Please buy my book, yes. Sorry, I just had to do the shameless plug at the end.
Well, yeah, everybody expects it.
Throwed it into the chat room.
Right. So we got through 2 hours, and we didn't have any hiccups. What do you think of that?
It went well. It went real well.
Excellent.
Henry, thank you a lot for coming on the show. It means a lot that that you were willing to come here and spend 2 hours of your time, talking to us about this. And certainly
it means a lot to me that I can express my views in a place like this.
Right.
Because I long ago endured a lot of suppression of my views. Yes.
Right.
Well, that's still going on out there in the world.
There
are places where they're sitting down on you real hard right now.
Sure, there's plenty of them, because
yeah.
Okay, I know it comes with the territory. I'm ready for it.
Well, thank you so much, Henry, for coming on. We really do appreciate it. And
thank you for having me. You guys
keep in touch with us. Anything you come out with some more information, or you learn of something else, certainly let us know about it, and we'd be more than happy to get you back on the show.
Well, certainly.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I down the road there may be more. Yes, indeed. And I'd be happy to come back and talk about it. So yeah, thanks a lot, you guys. Thanks a whole lot. It's really been fun.
All right. Well, folks, it was another interesting show tonight. DB, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I don't have, because I just got kicked off.
No, I still hear you.
It says I'm now off the host queue. That British lady just told me something.
Really?
Yeah, no, we could let it go at this. There might be some things I'll think of and bring it up next week.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody, for tuning in tonight. If you're listening to the rest of this show, you're listening to it on the archive, obviously. We thank everyone for tuning in tonight. We had a great crowd, and we appreciate each and every one of our listeners. So until next week, folks, take care, and everyone have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.
A legend silently stalks the forest around the world, leaving giant man-like footprints in its wake. Skeptics scoff, while the true believers search for the answers, and those who have seen it will never forget. Monday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern, Blog Talk Radio. Billy Willard and the Blog Squatcher present Sasquatch Watch Radio. Your hosts Billy Willard and Dee Donlin bring you 60 minutes of the latest news and information, newly discovered evidence, and interviews with those searching for the truth and those who have seen it. Do you believe? Want to know the truth? It's out there waiting. Monday nights, 9 p.m., Blog Talk Radio. Sasquatch Watch Radio. Sit down, hold on tight, get ready, because it is about to go down. blogtalkradio.com/Sasquatch Watch Radio.
At the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Federal Employee Program, we're helping you spend less on your prescriptions. With the FEP Medicare Prescription Drug Program, eligible members with Medicare can pay lower out-of-pocket costs for higher-cost drugs and get additional approved prescription drugs than our traditional pharmacy benefits, all with the same FEP premium. There's even a cap on the amount you pay out-of-pocket on prescriptions each year, helping you save money. That's the benefit of Blue. Learn more at fepblue.org/MedicareRx.
Oh, come on now. You know you deserve it. A steak patty on any McDonald's breakfast sandwich. I mean any breakfast sandwich. Biscuit, McMuffin, bagel, McGriddles. A juicy steak patty on any breakfast sandwich. And when you order through the app, buy one and get one free. Now go get 'em. Valid for products of equal or lesser value. Limited time only at participating McDonald's. Valid one time per day. Excludes $1, $2, $3 menu.